Hi, I would like to welcome you today to our presentation on where is the money, and really it's controlling nonprofit spending and how do we do that. I am Keith Greeno from Acima Solutions, and today what we wanted to go through is just an overview of purchase order and account payable management and the various options that are available to your organization to help you control your spending. So with the agenda today, what we want to deal with is just current issues affecting nonprofit procurement, and then we want to just go through the various options, being the purchasing workflow and then payables workflow, talking about fund availability and how you can control that, talking about commitment accounting, e-document management, where we can actually physically embed the documents right into your accounting system so that it gives you ease of use from anywhere. And then we just want to talk about which is right for you and what is your best solution depending on what's going on in your organization, and then following up with some questions. So let's just dive into the system because we don't have a lot of time today. So let's talk about nonprofit processing facts and what's going on in the industry. And so understand that one out of every 40 keystrokes is in error. And what this is saying is that every time that you're doing data entry, and everybody, no matter how good they are, they're always making mistakes once in a while. But this is an average. And so the point being is that this is why we want to ensure that you're only entering data once, because the more times that the data gets entered again and again, there's more likely to be error inside that data. The next one being is 33% average reduction in invoice processing costs if we have an automated system. And so this can be significant. And in the next slide, we're going to be just talking about invoice processing costs. And you can see that sometimes this can be enough just to pay for one of these systems all by itself. But further, we go into 15% of all paper that's handled is lost. And so when we talk about these manual processes later on, you're going to see that every time we're handling these steps, we're moving the paper along, how often does it get lost in your organization? Then 15 to 30% of all employees' time is spent searching for information. And if we can make it so that you can get access to the information when you need it, wherever you are, this certainly can help reducing the employee's time. And just think about the effect that this would have on your nonprofit organization if you had the availability of that time with all your employees. Then the last four, if we talk about 92% require audit trails or accreditation compliance. And so as we have this compliance, or you're looking to get compliance for an accreditation, you need to maintain a real solid workflow so that all your information is flowing accurately, so it's all coming into the system so that it makes sense. Okay? And so workflow systems can certainly help us with that. Next one, 87% lack visibility and have weak budget accountability and overspending. And so if we cannot see what's going on in our system, if we cannot see how much money we're actually spending, how can you hold the department heads accountable? And so what we want to do is just talk about, and what we're going to show today is just giving you the visibility so that the department heads can be held accountable and hopefully reduce your overspending. The next one, 82%, say if they could actually share the information, it would reduce the amount of delays in processing. And so this is costing us time and money, partly in that processing cost up above with the invoices, but understanding that we just want to slow this or speed this up where it doesn't slow us down for the approvals, so we can move the information much, much faster through our organizations. And then the last one being 73% of us want to become more environmentally responsible. I think probably that number should be higher. But, by going green, we can go to a 100% paperless operation if you actually fully implement one of these automation systems. So how do we do that? And let's just talk about the invoice cost. So understand the best in class, these top 20%, the 2.18 cents or dollars, or $2.18, I should say, to process an invoice is usually only achievable when you're running with a fully automated system. If you're running with a fully manual system, you're more than likely down at the bottom at that $34.11. And if you look at that, that is a significant cost. All it's doing is just taking how many processing or how many invoices are processed, right? And then coming back saying, what is the average before or after a full automation implementation? So your organizations, if you take a look at, if you're running at the $34 an invoice, and you could be at $2, just calculated by the number of invoices that are being processed, and you see that there is likely a significant savings that's available to your organization. And this is all, why is it available? And let's just talk about a manual paper process. So again, lots of data entry. So we've got data entry and paper handling. Paper handling by receiving it, distributing it to the right people, making sure that the invoices, if they're email, are printed, then doing a data entry to it, then making sure that the invoice is photocopied and filed into the right spot, making sure that you're mailing off the invoices so that you can get them approved, or you've got a whole bundle that are being transmitted over to the approval, which is certainly time-consuming. As we move these invoices through the system, we're losing them. As the approval steps are happening, maybe if the invoice is not there or missing a document, the approval step is even delayed even further, right? During this whole process, the guy who actually wanted the information, or the person that's in the department head, where is the actual purchasing involved? Where is the visibility to let them know that it's actually been approved and is actually coming? Or maybe there's a delay in the approval, but how do we see that visibility and the costing happening all the way through the system? So with a manual process, this is extraordinarily difficult to maintain, and this is why lots of the organizations are struggling, especially as more and more information is coming through, or the accreditations and auditing is happening where you have to maintain control. So if we look at just a basic workflow, and so this is one that we've drafted for one of our clients, but understand, in the Sage 300 system, right out of the box, we can actually handle this top information right here, where we're talking about the orders are coming in, whether it's a requisition or a purchase order, coming into the purchase order system where it is matched up. So we can do this right out of the box with an electronic approval system inside of a Sage 300 system. Okay, so that's kind of option number one, basic purchase orders, adding it to your system so that we can handle this requisition. But it's just the basic stuff. Now let's go a little bit further, okay? Because if we want additional approvals, or we want fund availability that's also talking in here, right, we need to go to an enhanced system that we're going to move into. So the first one being, let's talk about purchasing workflow. So in the purchasing workflow, really, it's automating all of the processes as you're coming through. So action being starting at this user action, just this is where I say, okay, I need to purchase something. I need to put in a requisition, okay? So what it's doing is there's an evaluation engine saying, is the guy able to do that? Then it goes into the workflow engine where it says, okay, if they're able to do it, then it moves into here where we've got this approval management notifications happening in the workflow. And there's options inside of here. Either we can do it inside of your accounting system, or we can do it with a linked up web-based system where we actually have requisitions and approvers all happening out in the web, and then it's coming into our accounting system. So both of them work exactly the same ways, and we will go through that with one of the purchase order entry in a minute. But I just want to make sure that we understand the flow of the systems. So evaluation engine, workflow engine, and then going into a validation updating engine where it actually changes and modifies our accounting system with the actual purchase order or the invoice being entered. Okay? So the next step is just talking about the purchasing workflow itself. And really what we're saying is that there's three different phases or three different functions inside of these workflow systems. One is the configuration where we set up the actual workflows and where everything has to go as far as approvals, where we set up authorization levels by the users and link users to workflows to cost centers, right? So we have these cost centers then get set up over in here, and these are your various departments, or maybe it's the HR department, or maybe it's a different location, but it's different for each one of your organizations on what kind of cost centers you've got, where it links up with the general ledger, okay? And if you have inventory, it'll link to that as well. And then we can also set up catalogs where we have approved vendors and approved items that you're actually able to order, okay? So once we've got all of this purchasing workflow engine set up, then we actually let the engine handle the logical transactions through the system following our rule. Computers are really stupid things, but one of the things they can do is follow rules really well. And so the bottom end is these engines go through and they're following the tests that you've set up in there, and they move through the various routing. So if it's a fixed asset purchase, it needs to go to somebody different than just the regular purchasing. And the other side of it is actually the event logs and tracking all of the transactions. So when was it the requisition originally put in? When was the first approval approved? You know, if you think about it as the Pure Leader, where Pure Leader, if you phone up and say, listen, I didn't get the package, you know, Pure Leader is able to go into their system and say, hey, I see that Mary Jane actually signed that off on September the 15th at 2:15. So understand that event log is tracking all of the approvals, what's going on, and who the next person is, so that you always see and have visibility in where in the workflow you're sitting. So if you're a department head, you're looking at the system, you can see where in the process flow that your particular requisition is. And then this email pump that they're talking about here is purely just the engine that actually generates the emails. So based on the workflow, it's going to say, okay, this needs supervisory approval. It's going to send it to the appropriate supervisor. And then the final piece of this puzzle is this workflow management. And what that really is talking about, it's just handling the exceptions. When we need to do transfers from one cost center to another, when we need to override a budget approval because they're over budget, or it's outside of the spending criteria, or it may be an unapproved vendor, this is where the workflow management has to be maintained. Okay? Good. All right, let's go to the next one. So we're talking about the actual purchasing workflow itself. And what this is just a document which is straight from the Sage 300 purchase order entry system. And understand it's been modified with these 2 additional fields because of this enhanced processing. But it's exactly the same data entry, exactly the same system, so that there's no additional training. So whether you're using the basic purchase order requisition system, you can easily move up and add these cost centers, and what you do is you just configure them and then you start to do it through workflow. But exactly the same processes. And really what it's doing is, you see, when you're dealing with a purchasing workflow, you're actually upfront controlling the cost. So if you cannot issue a purchase order to a vendor, then the vendor is not going to incur and send you an invoice. The bottom line is that you try to get it set up where your procedures and processes are configured so that vendors are only able to sell something to your organization if there's a purchase order for it. If you've done that, then really what it does is it locks the door right up front so that no spending is occurring without having it approved and the budget availability being there. And we will be discussing that a little bit further on in the webinar. So this is a data entry screen for the purchasing, where we're starting the actual purchasing process and getting approvals of purchase orders and requisitions up front. And we can control how many approval steps this goes through. The next slide that we're going to be talking about, and this is just, remember when we were talking about the web interface, exactly the same interface. This one that we're talking about is coming through the accounting system. So if we go back a little bit, this is the engine over here where we're talking about inside the accounting system. This one outside the accounting system, which is in the web, can do exactly the same thing, just a different input screen. But if you look at it, it's same information, talking about workflow, cost centers, all of the date and transactions. And when I accept and approve this, this comes straight into my accounting system, so I do not have to enter anything again. Data entry once. 1 in 40 member keystrokes is an error. I want as few of them as possible. Okay, so this is a web interface and just dealing with it. Now the other thing that happens is that this particular system does not use any accounting unpacks. So it doesn't use any of the accounting licenses. It's using the system outside and then it's linking back in. So it actually can be more cost effective for the company, but it depends on your individual circumstances. Okay? So let's talk about a payable workflow. So now just stop for a second. So what we've done now is the last stuff we were talking about purchasing workflow, okay? And a purchasing workflow is different because what it is, it's up front, we're talking about it, and if we go back to this flow, we're talking right up here, this is controlling the purchasing. So if we make it so that every vendor will not give us anything unless we have a purchase order, we can lock the door before we actually even phone the vendor to get the invoice. What we're talking now is actually starting the process more down in here where we're actually in the accounts payable. We're circumventing, we're not running a purchase order system, we're running it actually through the accounts payable system. So if we go through here again, what we're doing, you see, we're actually in the account payable invoice entry where we're actually capturing and we're doing the workflow management from here. So it's a little bit more risky because what we're doing now is we're actually controlling the spending after the invoice has been received into the organization. But it's up to you where you want to start. But this one starts with the vendor invoice when you're talking a payable workflow. But when you're doing it, it still allows you to do the same workflow so you can keep it by cost center and everything inside the system, same data entry screen as your Sage 300 invoice entry, but it's adding additional fields. In the next one, you can see we can actually do the approvals based on payments. So what we're doing is we're controlling payments, but it's after the horse may be out because somebody's already phoned the vendor and got an invoice, and now you're awaiting approval for the payments. So it certainly gives you a little bit of control, but maybe not as much as if you're controlling it with the purchase order system. So now let's carry this a little bit further because here's where it really starts to all come together with these systems. And that's when we add the funds availability tracking into it. This is where the visibility starts to get very, very clear for everybody. If you've got a department head and they're looking at this type of a system, and whether it's web-based or not doesn't make any difference. But if you can see what your budget was for contract service, you can see the actuals, you can see you've got commitments already out there for 16, which shows you $21,000 over your available budget already, and you've got another unapproved for another $80,000. Oops, excuse me, didn't mean to do that. This is clearly going to give everybody, whether it's the executive director of your organization, whether it's your CFO, whether it's your controller, everybody's going to be able to see what's going on. Your department heads should have the availability to come in here and see what's going on inside of their department only. So how are they going to say that they were not accountable for these spending if they can see it? But you can set these systems up as well. If you're running with funds availability, I can make it so that at the purchase order, it will not allow them to generate a purchase order against contract services because it's over budget, right? It's over budget. It's not going to allow them to do that. My apologies. I just clicked on there where I shouldn't have. So you can see that this gives them full access to all of the information that they need. And it goes a little bit further because this is a summary of what's going on. And I can click on these individual items. And what it does is it gives me a full history on what's been approved, what's been not approved, what's unapproved that's out there that's all going into the various expense accounts. And so what it's doing is it's tying in your general ledger to your cost center, which is tying into the individual cost center and the approvers at each one of the steps so that you can stop the spending before it actually gets incurred. Okay, I see I've got a little bit of a question here, and it's just with regards to the spending on the system itself. So yes, the bottom end is if we have got the system set up in the workflow where it controls and will not allow you to spend the money if you're over budget on your purchase orders or at the invoice level, then it will not ever get to be over the actuals, right? The actuals cannot be over budget because it's going to stop you. But understand, and I'll just go back a little bit here, and so when we were talking about the actual workflow management, someone would have to override that workflow to approve those budgeting amounts that are in excess. So if we've got it turned on, they can't go over. If we unless we actually have this management approval which overrides it. Okay, good question. So let me go back to this funds availability. So the system, this is real time what's going on in your accounting system. This is giving your cost center managers, your department heads, all of that, they're getting real time information on what's being spent and what they're incurring all the time. So they may forget that they actually approved a PO a month ago and they may not have received the item, but they're going to see that it's sitting out there and where it is in the actual system itself. Okay, so let's go to the next one, which is commitment accounting. And I know we're moving fairly quickly, and we can do detailed demos of any of this stuff later if any of you are interested. But commitment accounting really is this. Some companies require this, or some organizations require this for their tracking. But really what it does is it gives you just a snapshot on that other fund availability that I was showing you before, and it's just in a financial statement format. But instead of just taking actual information, it will add in approved purchase orders into here. And then it gives you what the actual budget available is. So, and you can do some contextual or conditional fields where it says, yes, this is an exceeding budget. Okay? So really what it does is it just gives you a snapshot report. It's more of a financial type reporting that can be done, and some nonprofits require this. So if it's required, you can do it. So now let's park it there for a second. So what we've looked at is we can do purchase orders inside the Sage 300 system just by itself with requisitions and doing approvals, single steps. We can put that on steroids and add enhancements to it, where we can now start tracking it by various workflows, multiple approval levels. We can actually control with the funds availability whether they actually can approve a purchase order or an invoice all the time, or we have to do various workflows to approve it at a managerial level before it's approved. And then on top of that, we can actually maintain a commitment accounting of what we've incurred to date based on approved purchase orders and actual amounts. Now let's go one step further to this, and let's just start talking about these e-document management. And what we're talking about doing is capturing and scanning invoices and all of the information up front. This is where we can start to get into the paperless office if we want to. We've got it all maintained in the database, which is flowing straight into your accounting system so that everything is integrated. We do not want to have to redo anything. We want to have the availability to visibly see what's going on in our systems anytime, anywhere, by any individual that needs that information. So these e-management systems can do that. This one that we're talking about is the ACOM. It's just one of the options that's out there, but there's a bunch of them. And so understand, we're going to look at a process flow for this e-document. So once we're into this e-document management, you see we're scanning the documents right up front, right? We're scanning purchase orders, or if the purchase order is in electronic format, we can embed it into the document. We can get vendor invoices embedded into the document. And I'm going to show you on one of the next slides where this embedded document starts to show up. And what it does is it improves the ability for us to do the approvals, because we can see the actual original documents embedded in here right without having to go back and have paper moving around. So let's just go to the next one, and maybe this will get a little clearer, is that if we embedded a document, so if we're in the approval process, we can see that we've actually got the vendor document included right with it. And this is one of the documents from Paramount Technologies. The other ones we were looking at is Pacific. The other one is talking about ACOM. So there's lots of options out there. It just depends what kind of requirements you're trying to solve. But you can see if we've got this document, it's much easier to do an approval of this right here. Okay? And let's go a little bit further. So once this document's embedded, and so understand this is your standard AP invoice screen out of your Sage 300 system, nothing special. But what's been added on here is this little icon when you start doing document management. And do you want to view the document? Do you want to add a new invoice to it? Do you want to do anything about the workflow in here? Remember the workflow that we're talking about. What kind of purchasing workflow did you have attached to it? And it shows you where it was and where the approvals came from and who did what, okay? But if this is available, anytime I want to go in here, if I click on this, guess what it does? And let's go to the next screen, and what it does is actually links directly to the actual original document. So if you'd scribbled something across this invoice and then scanned it, it shows that particular writing. So all of that information, this is looking at your filing cabinet without having to go to the physical filing cabinet. And so what it does, it allows you to go to more of a paperless operation where you don't have to file the documents because they're filed with this forever. Now, understand backups become much, much more critical, but as far as accountability and being able to look up the documents anywhere, and so whether this is the executive director or whether this is your department head, if you've got availability to look up and drill down to the documents, you can see what's going on in your department or in the organization as a whole. So where we end up with is this, is that we've got lots of options and lots of different options inside of options, which means, from document management, there's multiple different ways to do document management. But what we need to do, and this is the next step, which is right for you. And so you need to look at yourselves internally and just say, okay, what is the cost, the real cost, if I do not solve this problem? We know we're doing all of these manual processes. We know that it costs money to enter an invoice. We know that it takes a lot of our staff time to find documents. So what is the cost? How much time is it taking that we could save, that our people would be able to spend actually servicing our clients rather than actually going around looking for information? Or let's take a look at our budgets and see how much overspending there is. If we could control that and keep it under control where people don't overspend, what is that going to save us? What's it going to reduce in cost? And then what are the cost implications, right, of not having controls and processes in place? So if we are looking for accreditation, what can sometimes help with regards to nonprofits, getting just a little bit more ability to do donations and other things. But if we do not have process controls in place, we may not be able to get accreditation. Or we may have additional audit fees because our auditors are spending a huge amount of time just trying to find out what we are doing and what's happening in the back end. And then the other side is, what are the potential benefits of having enhanced processes? If we had the ability to share documentation where we've got department heads being able to see what's being spent and why, right? Then they are accountable, and therefore they tend to keep the expenses under control. And that allows us to really do this last one. We can determine a cost and a return on investment. So if we know what the benefits are up here, then we can take a look and say, okay, listen, it costs $10,000 to implement one of these systems. If we're saving 20 up here, then it's a no-brainer to go through and invest in the technology to move us out of the dark ages and into the 21st century with one of these automated systems. Reducing errors, reducing data entry points, reducing lost documents, eliminating all these manual processes and being able to share what's going on. Okay? So that brings us to the next one. What are the keys to success of implementing one of these systems? And management buy-in is absolutely critical. Absolutely critical. If you've got your executive directors or your department heads that are not 100% committed to data automation and bringing in one of these systems where it helps us control the spending, it'll never work, right? We need to understand that the organization needs to accept the responsibility for the improvement. If you've got senior management that says to one of your department heads, we understand that this process flow's taken a little bit of time, don't do it. Then really don't do it. Don't spend the money because it's not going to work for your organization. You've got to accept the responsibility in your organizations to improve your processes. Software is only 50% of the solution, no matter what software you've got. It's the procedures and processes that you develop inside that software that makes it work. And so as an organization, you need to really plan and set goals for each one of these projects and get feedback from your organizations as you're trying to implement it to make sure that this stuff works. because what we want to do is make sure that if anybody's got something that is really critical, that we understand it and we make a process to make it work. And then understand that this is going to have a huge impact on your organizational culture. If you've not had anybody that's accountable and you start holding them accountable and showing them where they're overspending, they are going to fight it. And so understand that this is going to be an impact, and you need to make sure you're addressing it up front. All right, I know I went fairly quickly through that. I apologize, but the bottom line is what we wanted to do is just give you an overview on the various options, and hopefully we've enlightened you on just what's available out there, and there is a way to see where your money is going and be able to control that spending in your nonprofit organization. There is really no excuses for anybody not understanding that there is a solution to your problems. Thank you very much, and I'll look at you next time.